Michael, thanks so much for taking time to talk to us. We're really glad to be here and appreciate your time.
Uh, I'm happy to be here and happy to assist.
Awesome. One of the things we're looking at from a community housing perspective is the range of tools that we might reasonably deploy or grow if they already exist as we seek to achieve a state where all New Zealanders are well housed. And there are a broad range of people, a growing number of people in New Zealand for whom the New Zealand housing system is not performing very well. It's not responding to their needs. It's not meeting their needs. And so one of the things we're looking at is inclusionary housing, inclusionary zoning as a manifestation of value capture. In your own words, could you describe what that means? Because a lot of people haven't really encountered it in the New Zealand context, even though it's quite widespread all over the OECD in other jurisdictions, other countries around the world. A lot of New Zealanders aren't really aware of what it is and why it might be a good idea.
Yeah. Well, it's effectively a market intervention or a planning tool. Like here in New Zealand, I think it's fair to say all colors of all stripes would say that we have a bit of a market failure in the housing market. And so when you have a market failure and the market is not able to produce housing for not only the uber wealthy, but people all the way across the spectrum, sometimes you need an intervention. And so some markets will look at inclusionary zoning to try to provide affordable housing for lower end spectrum. My work with Auckland Council, that's how I got involved with inclusionary zoning. It was really more the intermediate market. So sometimes they're referred to as key workers. These are folks who maybe generations past could have afforded to get on the property ladder, but because of the unaffordability kind of issues that we face, their salaries are not enough. And they're usually called key workers because they tend to be your first responders, your teachers, the people in need in your community, but their salaries are not up to the level that would get them the kind of housing that their parents, grandparents, and other generations before were able to get into. Mm-hmm. So inclusionary zoning is, like I said, a planning tool. It incentivizes or forces, and there's all kinds of varieties out there to try to fix that market failure. And often that sets aside a proportion of approved housing that is going to be offered up typically at a reduced price point in order to allow people that are not really wealthy to get into the housing market. Well, right now they're blocked.
In a predominantly market-driven housing system, which I think is fair to say is a good way of characterising the New Zealand housing market, is there a role for inclusionary housing? And if so, what might that look like if we were going to try and implement it as a sort of nationwide intervention?
Yeah, I think if we look at ideals, and yes, New Zealand would of course like to think of themselves as market-driven, market-oriented economy. We're not a communist economy or socialist. We don't see ourselves that way. If it all worked the way it's supposed to work, we wouldn't need inclusionary zoning. But we do have a market failure, and therefore it is an effective tool. I think the key aspects, in my view, of inclusionary zoning that requires it, what you need to have happen to make it effective, is it needs to be transparent. There needs to be players involved that are going to work with the program to make sure it continues providing those services in the future. That was the big failure here in Auckland. When I was involved in the unitary plan, we were looking at inclusionary zoning. There simply wasn't the players that needed to be brought in, like CHIPS would be one, community housing providers. They weren't on the party discussing things. They weren't an active player at the time. And because of that, it just kind of fell apart. And again, the market forces, who are the market forces? My role in the research that the council did, it was talking to developers. It was the real market players behind it. They hated the idea. They despised the idea.
What were the big objections, just out of interest?
Well, first, some of them did not like the concept of having a forced price point products in there. They might have been at the higher end. Some of the developers I spoke to were definitely high in the market, and they didn't want a reduction of value as they saw it by putting a spectrum of other products that they wouldn't normally put into their development. So that was one. A lot just saw this as you're just giving a free pass, a windfall game to certain lucky people. And they just didn't see that as the right way to go about it. And to be honest, I empathize and I see eye to eye to some of those issues. And so if inclusionary zoning was going to get off the ground, work, a lot of those details have to be hammered out. Groups that have an interest, like community housing providers, for instance, need to be front and center and working hand in hand with government, who identify there's a housing crisis, who identify that the market is not figuring it out, and I think they are looking for solutions. So they need to be provided a bit of a roadmap, but there can't be any major loose ends, because that's the thing that just pushed over the inclusionary zoning efforts of Auckland Council about a decade ago.
Michael, we've got an example, a case study, a live case study to some extent in the New Zealand context, where inclusionary housing's been delivered over a period of a number of years at reasonable volumes to address key worker shortages in the Queenstown Lakes area.
Mm.
I'm interested to unpack a little bit more your experience in and around the period when the different territorial local authorities here in the greater Auckland region combined into the super city, and then there was the formation of the unitary plan, and you and a bunch of good people had a genuine attempt at getting inclusionary housing over the line in this context. What do you think? Number one, I'm interested in the motivation, the why, and then also a little bit of what do you think the reasons were that fell apart? And is there an opportunity? Sorry, three questions in one. Is there an opportunity for us to have another look at it? Have things changed, I suppose?
Well, I mean, just to start off with what Auckland Council tried to do. So they had a two-stage solution in terms of inclusionary zoning. So developers were given two pathways. One, they could do kind of a perpetual affordable housing, 5% of the dwellings that they provide in, say, a master plan community or an apartment building or whatever it was. And they had to be at a very specific price point. To be honest, I can't remember what the metrics of it were, but it was quite a considerable subsidy on the products that they're delivering to market.
That was expressed as a discount from market?
Yes.
Price?
Yeah, it was a considerable discount from market, but it was only 5%. And then the other one was, they dubbed it as relative affordable. And in that case, I think it was 80% of the median, or there was, again, I can't remember it's been a while now, but it was a much closer to market amount. And from recollection, I think one, maybe two, no more than that, went for door number one, which was the 5%. To do the relative affordable, you had to do 10% of the complex, but there were not that many strings attached to it. The price point was more achievable in the developer's eyes. And what ended up happening is everybody went down that track, and the products that they would produce, they were clever enough. And so they were just given a price point. They weren't given a number of bedrooms or any kind of description. And so they ended up creating the smallest, tiniest product that they could possibly put together. And it wasn't much different than the real market price for the one-bedroom apartment or studio apartment, or like in a case in Hobsonville, I think they had a series of houses that literally were one-bedroom houses. It's like a freestanding apartment. And that was the market solution. So they were clever enough to see a gap, see a loop, and they went through it. And so for all these various reasons, it just wasn't achieving the end goals. And it wasn't stitched up tight enough. It wasn't well-defined enough. And at the end of the day, when we went through the independent hearing process, panel process, it just was put to the side.
Okay. And so if we were to have a go at doing this again, what can we learn from that experience and the previous attempt in the Auckland context that we might do differently if we were looking for, let's say, a more authentic uh, intended outcome? Because obviously, in our world, we don't want the definition of affordable just to be really, really small. Um, we have a sort of a broader vision around affordability, and that includes adequacy, be that culturally appropriate or the typology is appropriate to the needs of the household or the tenure, etc. So what lessons could we take from that experience?
Well, I mean, definitely on the product, what you're delivering, it needs to be, eh, you could do a market study to see what the demand is for that community that's being served. Maybe a simpler way, what I would suggest is that the affordable units that are offered are reflective of the development at large. So if you have, a few 3 beds, mostly 2 beds, a few 1 beds, then the affordable ratio is a similar kind of mix, and they mesh in well with what's provided to the market. Um, the key thing, I think, is that transparency element I mentioned earlier. There needs to be a player involved that is going to be, because the developers come and go. Developers come in, they're going to build this, they're going to sell it, and they don't want to know. Often it's Phoenix type companies that are born for this project and die at the end of the project. And there needs to be an entity that is going to have staying power, that is going to want to see if it's affordable units for a certain element of society, whether it's key workers or particular price points, that continues to serve further generations, not just the lucky person who got at the top of the list and got out with that thing. Because that's another thing that, again, through the independent hearing panel, what a lot of people, the criticisms are, well, that's just a windfall gain for that lucky individual. And who knows who gets to the top of that list.
Right. So here you're talking about the one and done rather than the retained and recycled
Yeah,
affordability.
because very few, I really do think it was just one example that did that. Everybody else went down to the relative affordable, and it's just a windfall for somebody, is the way that it was perceived. And it was perceived on all sides. The developers saw it that way, and most people who interacted with this process, the panel process, that was a key criticism. So that needs to be dealt with, and having a central player involved, I think, is the way to do it.
So this is really, from recollection, these are the special housing area provisions. Is that right, or is that something different?
Sort of. So the way it worked was they had the special housing areas, the SHAs, and there were certain benefits compared to what the operative plans were at the time. This was while they were making the unitary plan. And so the carrot that they gave the developers is, we are going to give you this opportunity to get a little bit more intensification, build more dwellings, smaller lot size, all these bonuses, but you need to provide some affordable units. And so that was the SHAs, and then the SHAs became the kind of example that the unitary plan tried to use.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to put it into the unitary plan, but then it got kicked out during the independent hearing panel process.
So in a hypothetical here, if we had adopted those provisions in the unitary plan all those years ago, and let's say an estimate of 5% retention had been left in place within the unitary plan, or some form of quantification of a huge opportunity that we missed, is there some? Have you got an estimate in terms of what that might look
Yeah,
like?
I mean, I ran the numbers, not for Auckland,
Okay.
but if we just got really ambitious and said that just spurred throughout the nation,
Yes.
you'd have around 20,000 affordable, perpetual affordable under that right now.
Across the whole country.
Yeah, if you kickstarted around 2016, which when the unitary plan kind of got into effect,
Yep.
you would have about 20,000, which ironically or interestingly is the same wait list for KO right now.
That's right. Yeah, that's the
so
social housing
that's
register.
right.
Has 20,000 households waiting for a home.
So I know it's, again, the way we looked at it in Auckland, it was more the intermediate market. We're not talking about social housing, but still, you could kind of see the scale
Yeah.
of the opportunity that was kind of missed.
A missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what do you think we need to do to help New Zealanders and particularly New Zealand's politicians and policy writers to overcome their fear or lack of commitment to inclusionary?
Well, again, when I was doing the work with council, I was speaking to developers. And one of the aspects that is going to be a challenge is who's going to pay for this? Where are the costs going to lie? Um, from my perspective, and many other academics, we see if you have a cost of, say, set aside 5% at a certain price point, and that price point would be a subsidy price compared to what the market price is. Um, if that is a known cost, it will work its way through the market. Where it will end up most likely is in the price of land. And right now, land is just ridiculous. And it's been ridiculous for a very long time in this country. And so, but that is a tough sell because that is an abstract. It's hard for people to make that connection back to land. The feedback I got from developers, where they would usually always go, is let's talk about development contributions.
Right. So waiving them potentially or reducing them?
I guess what I'll put it as a trick, an academic trick. Okay. I'm an academic. So what do? I give participation marks. I give out things and then I take them away somewhere over here. So really, I haven't done anything, but the students will do what I want because they're getting the free marks. And essentially what I would imagine would be a sensible way to go forward is maybe the development contributions overall are lifted a bit, but then those who maybe voluntarily, you might not be across the board, force every developer, every situation to do this, but you allow the option to say, listen, because of where I'm doing, the community I'm serving, it makes sense for me to do 5% or 10% or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then maybe their development contributions are reduced. Yeah. Yeah. So somebody else who's doing a high end, there's no way they want to do any affordable. Well, they have to pay the full price of the development contributions. That is something that was a feedback that I got over and over again from the development community, which I think is a sensible way that they would perceive it. And you have to get them on board.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we're not going to get anywhere if the developers are dead against this.
Michael, would you mind just dipping a little bit into the technical detail around inclusionary housing, inclusionary zoning in a New Zealand context, just in terms of the levers, the tools, the how it works when it's actually delivered and applied?
Well, I mean, I could really just speak to what we attempted to do.
Perfect.
In Auckland.
Yeah, sure.
And so whenever you do a new plan, you have to do under the RMA a Section 32 analysis, and you have to kind of vet the types of things you're proposing in the plan. And that was what I was brought in with a colleague of mine to do. And my element of that was to essentially do a feasibility study. And so I met with developers, identified typical development costs, margins, and worked through. And what I was trying to understand is, would the price points that were being considered by the planners I was working with at Auckland Council, would that just throw all of these projects, these hypothetical projects, into the bin? Mm-hmm. Would they not make it? And so what I found is, sure, there's going to be a point where if you push really hard, you're not going to be able to make projects that would have been feasible. Mm. Whereas if you do, and that's where we end up with things like 5% at the price point we did, there are these sensitive price points where you could achieve the outcomes that would make the developer happy. They'd get the profit for the risk they're taking, and then you could produce a reasonable amount of affordable houses. So that was the technical aspect of how we arrived at the kind of price points and the percentages that we did.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you, when you were working your way through that process, did you get a sense that local government were a willing and active participant in the conversation, that they could see the need for this, or was there still a gap there?
Well, I mean, if you say local government as the planners, the council planners were the ones working with us. They were the ones that actually engaged us to do the work. So, local government's a big body. So sure. There's lots of people in it. Definitely the planners that we worked with were keen to have this, and they were the ones fighting for it during the hearing panel. It was really the development community more than anybody else that was pushing back. The local body wanted it, but the development community did not.
And they've got a lot of clout, because without the development community, there's no new houses. If there's no new houses, there's no new affordable houses either. So critical stakeholders. What do you think it'll take to get this over the line, if we have a crack at implementing inclusionary housing across the nation, the view that we've received from Queenstown is that they need a little bit of air cover from central government, that they feel they've been left exposed as a local authority standing alone, and that it would help if there was some central guidance or central legislation and support. Have you got any view on that, given your experience here in the Auckland arena?
I mean, honestly, I didn't have any engagement with the central government at the time. But I can tell you that, one pattern that I've seen is when certain parties are in power, there tends to be a movement away from social housing traditional through the likes of KO and into community housing providers, for instance. So there are, and I think on both sides of the aisle, there is a lot of respect for chips.
Yep.
And everybody sees a role for chips. And again, I think a bit of the tragedy of what we tried is we didn't have that organization or any organization kind of holding the line and working in the process. It was just going to be, we're going to do these affordable houses, and what happens after they're sold, and it all just kind of falls apart because there's no structure in place to what's going to happen. And then you get the calls of windfall gains and unfairness and lack of transparency, and it all fell down. Whereas, again, I think because, say chips are in a very unique situation where both sides of the aisle are pro-chip.
Yes. Yes. And, and we're charitable and we're regulated.
I can't see any side throwing political darts at you, and so if the chips are willing to toe the line and really put a lot of effort into this, I think there's a going to be some political kind of, backing to that effort.
Yeah, particularly, I think one of the benefits that the charitable registered community housing sector brings is the ability to go long on this, to retain and recycle the affordability over multiple households, even with the same property, or recycling the capital. And I think perhaps, is it fair to say that was one of the elements that was missing?
It was an absolute key element because, again, you talk to developers, you talk to very wealthy people, everybody has a heart. Everybody, and what we don't want to see is lucky people get windfall gains in the sake of the word affordable, knowing that it's a bit of a sham. And that was the concern. And so because there wasn't a central player there to make sure, as a referee on this, make sure that these funds and all of this effort is going to maintain and have this ongoing benefit for society, people just lost faith in it. I think that's ultimately what happened.
Yeah.
And so hopefully if this is done again, that doesn't happen. And we have the right team involved.
So, in a way, the community housing sector is double regulated, because not only do we have the Community Housing Regulatory Authority doing significant, regular, more than annual checks on registered community housing providers, but all the full members of Community Housing Aotearoa are also charities. So they are regulated by the Charity Services and Department of Internal Affairs as well. And there is case law in New Zealand very clearly articulating what charitable purpose is insofar as it relates to affordable housing. So there are maximum income thresholds, and so I feel quite confident that we could play that role and do a good job of it to reassure the public.
Yeah. So I mean, there's the perpetuity of it. So that's the transaction to the next kind of recipient of this effort. But then there's also, there's a degree of skepticism. When I remember interviewing and talking through this, you could feel the skepticism of how the various ways that it could be abused on all sides. And that's where I think it's so critical that, say, CHIPS, other entities like CHIPS are involved. So take tenure, for example. Somebody gets the subsidy and they turn around and they rent it out. They got it for a sweet price. Now they rent it out and they bugger off and they do something else. They don't want to give up their sweet deal. So to kind of keep the recipients of this honest and, so to make sure that the tenure is actually owner occupation, not tenanted out and somebody making a killing off of it. Those are things that there needs to be checks in the system because everybody needs to trust that if we're going to go through this effort to try to solve this market failure, it's done in a fair and equitable way.
Yeah. And so that transparency aspect is an important feature of any good, sustainable, inclusionary housing program. It seems to me, I've heard of international programs where there's a whole lot of transparency, even at the level of the property development and the initiation of the project and the margins and the percentages. That what you're really arguing for is that that carries the whole way through the system from the creation of the properties through the lifetime of the occupancy.
Yeah, because like we talked about those numbers, 8 years or whatever of we could get 20,000. And if you kept that going, it just keeps on building. And so now you start having quite a portfolio of doing good for the society. And it's not about just the development. It's really about that huge portfolio that grows and grows and grows, and how you manage that and ensure that it is doing its purpose. It's not being abused. Because all along you're going to have developers constantly skeptical.
Okay.
That the what they see as subsidies, even if you have development contributions and some kind of to and fro, there's always going to be that degree, and it needs a central figure. Could be the government, or it could be an entity like the CHIPS.
Yeah.
That gives that assurance that we are guaranteeing that all of this work, all of this effort is being passed forward always.
So do you think it's worth us having a go at this again in New Zealand?
I think so. I mean, I wish it wasn't necessary. I don't. Again, the way the market should work is we shouldn't have this conversation. But given that as long as I've been here, 20 plus years now, it's always been broken, and it's going to take a long time to fix it if we ever can. And at least this is a solution in the right direction. And I think a lot of people would buy into the concept of this growing proportion of our housing stock being with a good steward and shepherded through, and making sure that we give these to people who, they're the generations before, parents, grandparents, they had different opportunities. And I think it really rubs society the wrong way of where we're headed. And a lot of people, even those that are benefactors of this and are doing very well, they don't like the fact that their grandkids, their kids are struggling and they don't have the same opportunities. And so if we could have some kind of market intervention like this and show the stock that we could build that is going to give people an affordable house with good, solid tenure, that they're not going to be toughed out by their landlord, I think every single stripe is going to sign on.
Yeah. And it's a hand up, really, isn't it? It's giving people that start. Their available choices then thereafter, perhaps there's more choice available. Some may move on into the open market without subsidy, without the need for the support.
And you can even think of having a limited time limited. Maybe it's not something that somebody lives their entire life in. Maybe it is a stepping stone. I don't know. I mean, that might be something to think about, because it's not social housing.
Right.
It's not. And so, but either way, it's a positive thing, and I see both sides of the aisle supporting something like this.
Yeah, you really got my attention with that number 20,000. That if we had made a bunch of different decisions all those years ago, there would be another 20,000 affordable houses in the New Zealand system. It's quite a standout.
Yeah, and that intermediate market, it's bigger than the social housing market. The latest figures I've seen is 100,000 in Auckland.
Yeah.
But again, that's 20,000 over a few years. It will continue to build. That's the point.
Yeah.
So right now it's a fifth of the Auckland's alone intermediate housing market, but eventually you would start to have would start eating away at that shortfall.
Yeah, substantial stock. And I hear you saying that it's a both and it's a common theme that's emerging, that we're a number of the people that we've been talking to about this are saying there's still a role for central government and state housing, and to address that intermediate market, because you said 100,000 in Auckland, and I understand from what I've read that there's 180,000 households now across the whole country who are paying well over 30 or 40 or 50% of their combined household income on their rent or their mortgage. So those are, we call them stressed renters or the intermediate market. that's such a large grouping that really something, is it fair to say that inclusionary, if it was implemented nationwide, would start to provide options for that stressed renter market that are not currently available?
No, yeah, it would. I mean, you start relieving any aspect of the market, and that's going to have knock-on effects for the whole market.
Mm.
Um, I guess the thing to just be wary of, and that's why I mentioned earlier about development contributions or other things that are developer friendly, is what you wouldn't want to do, and this is the big, boogeyman, is to do anything that is going to reduce housing supply. So you might achieve 5% of a much smaller number.
Yes.
And that is that's the thing that needs to be grappled with. So things that are developer friendly, things that people can get on board with, it's a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick, then you'll have a workable solution.
Michael, the government at the moment, we're going for growth. There's a number of pillars in that going for growth strategy, and there's quite a lot of talk in Wellington circles and policy circles around value capture. And here we are. Thank you for hosting us here in the business school at the University of Auckland, and just a few blocks away. They're finishing off the details of the Central Rail Link and the billions of dollars of investment that have gone into improved transportation. Now, obviously, anyone who's got a property anywhere near one of those railway stations is seeing an enormous value uplift. We're waiting to hear what's going to happen and where the legislation's going to land around the sort of zoning and such like. But I think for our listeners and for our readers, I think it's really important that they understand that often there will be investment. It might be schools, hospitals, it might be workplaces, it might be transport where there is an uplift. And in a way, I don't want to oversimplify it, but in a way, what we're doing is capturing the value of that uplift, some of the value, let's say 5% or 10%, for the benefit of the community, the broader community, expressed in the form of affordable housing for key workers. Am I oversimplifying or?
No, but I could be devil's advocate and say, I'm the landowner that's next to one of these stations, but now I'm having to carry the burden to provide affordable housing. First, is that even the right location? And so, again, I've talked to a lot of developers, and value uplift and kind of capturing what they see as their God-given right of capital gains just by being clever and positioning and buying that property where they bought it. Definitely you're not going to get them on side with that kind of direct value capture.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do, and doesn't mean there can't be an effort. But I can tell you that they will not be fans of any kind of targeting the people who benefit from, because it is windfall gains. It's massive capital gains. They didn't build the station. They just happen to own near the station. Maybe they're just lucky. Maybe they're strategic. Who knows? But I think it's probably a better strategy to be broad and just say, if you develop in Auckland 5% of every single development, and allow them to opt in or opt in or out, like I said before, where it's more of using things like development contributions or some other mechanism, lever to do it. With things like value capture, I would be more focused on land banking. That I think is nefarious, out on the fringes, just sitting on a property, waiting for the city to come to you and purposely not making full use of land on the skirts, on the outskirts. There might be a better case, just kind of, maybe persuade those landowners who are sitting on property that could be developed and could be put to use and help ease kind of the housing supply issues that we have. But they're choosing not to because they want to pump up and get that huge capital gain. Maybe there would be things like rates,
like a targeted rate. Yep.
Yeah, that's probably, and even the lucky ones that are near the stations, maybe targeted rates are the way to kind of deal with some of that. That, of course, doesn't hit the developer. It hits the people down the line who occupy the apartments or whatever in the buildings. But that might be viewed as a more fair way to recognize the amenity that those stations have now provided, that you have to pay for that. There was a lot of infrastructure there. You benefited more than people at a distance. Therefore, you pay for that benefit, and maybe paying through rates over time is the appropriate way to recognize that. I think the value capture, just, I'm going to take your capital gains. It's going to immediately get people's backs up. It'll be hard to get people on board with that.
Yeah. Well, it's really it's helpful having you advocate so much for transparency and in a way equity. If we're going to get broad acceptance of these instruments, then we're going to they've got to be palatable for all parties.
Yeah.
And really grateful. Thank you for your insight, because you did that work, a lot of work interviewing, particularly the development community, and we're all in this together.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that.
And I have to say, the developers were lovely. It was really, they weren't lovely when we got into the independent hearings panel. No, they weren't lovely then. But just talking to them like this, they were open and they shared all kinds of very valuable insights with me. And so I'm just relaying them to you.
Yeah, perfect. It's got to work if we're going to get it over the line.
Yeah. No, you have to have them on board. You really don't want to go to battle with the development community.
Yeah. Michael, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's awesome.